So, good morning. I am here with the wonderful and amazing Becky Morissey, faculty member at the Essence of Yoga Center. And we're doing a faculty interview. She's new to our faculty. And so I just want to take a little time to chat with her and just do a little get to know you kind of thing. So Becky, just to start us off, would you be willing just to say just a little bit about yourself and your background, just a short little bit?
Sure. Um, my yoga background, I started looking at yoga more than 30 years ago, and it has led my life through lots of different changes and phases. Um, I think one of the things that it really led me to was this sense of knowing self, being inspired by self in a way that allows me to be fully and truly in a life of reflection, contemplation, and really being available for not only the events in my life, but the people in my life. And I think the focus of my practice for the last 10 years has been this wide sense of self that's kind of a container for the things that are meaningful and important to me in my life. I
Hmm.
think it teaches you to do that and
Yeah,
and gives you an opportunity to find that for yourself.
yeah. Would you say it's like that feeling of presence or just being? Um,
Yeah, and pre-presence, pre-being. Like, what's
ooh,
it like to watch the things that you are developing and evolving to come into your presence in that moment? And I think that that's particularly interesting to me. I kind of found that coming into my yoga practice or yoga life. And when I say practice, I mean sort of living yoga. Asana is part of it, and it's also supports other things within it. Was the study of embryology. When I was encouraged to look at embryology as part of yoga anatomy studies, I realized, wow, there's a way to really understand where these things came from, that
mm,
they're mysterious and mystical, but they're also knowable.
yeah.
And that was a gift from yoga, is permission and a journey into the under supports of the present awareness. And I'm still fascinated by that.
Yeah. Could you just say a little bit more about embryology, just for those who might not know, what that means or how that might be related to a yoga practice or
Sure.
where one might look to
Yeah.
find out more?
Embryology is the study of how we grow from conception to, I'd say, well, birth, sure, but beyond. Even now, my embryology is still developing now, and I'm 50.
Yeah.
We are never far away from our embryology. It never leaves us. It just diversifies and becomes more complex, just like our thinking and our breathing and everything about us. And yoga is a lens to understand that, because we kind of move within, we think within, we live within this beautiful essence of yoga, which might be our body, you know.
Mhm.
And understanding that is just like understanding the beauty, why a beautiful thing is beautiful. That is part of, I think, what embryology brought to me, was not only how form and function came together, which is fascinating, but
Mhm.
also how it brings together this container, like I said before, of knowing and loving and being and discovering our own wisdom. I think embryology is the start of how that wisdom grew into a body. And it doesn't have to just be human embryology. It can be the embryology of a plant. I kind of like to start there with people, which was an idea from my daughter's third grade class. We
Oh,
were a seed, and we grew a spine, and then we grew into more complex and possibly beautiful structures, although I think embryonic structures are beautiful in their own way.
yeah.
So it's that sense of yoga unveiling different ways of seeing self. And I became fascinated with the things that bring us to a sense of self in a very broad way, but also in a micro self too. That's an important self as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one could say that potentially any experience can bring us more to that sense, or even that every experience does bring us more to that sense, closer
I
to
think,
that
I
sense
think,
of ourselves.
I love that. I think every experience does that. And
Yeah.
I think yoga gives us practices and eventually a no practice of
Right.
how to, be in that self, know more about the self if we want, or just simply be in self.
Yeah.
And that's precious. That's very precious. And I love how it's a way of being with self that's millennia in the making. And
Yeah.
we each contribute to that. If we were to think of it as a beautiful symphony, we each contribute to that symphony in our own way, whether we're teaching or if we're just practicing for 10 minutes in a quiet 10 minutes. Oh, I got 10 minutes. I'm going to do a down dog.
Yeah.
Or I've got 10 minutes. I'm going to sit and breathe, or maybe just move my spine or move nothing. All of that is contributing to this beautiful essence of what yoga is and where it's leading us.
Yeah. I love that. I think it can be almost this trap of thinking, well, if I don't have an hour or an hour and a half, or if I'm not in my home practice space, or if I don't have my mat, or whatever message it is that's telling us it's not good enough, I'm not good enough,
Yeah.
this moment isn't good enough, we can get so tied up in that. And I so resonate with what you're saying, that just it doesn't matter, in a sense, any spark, minuscule moment that we take where we just even pause to feel into, okay, where am I in space? How is my breath? How am I? Is contributing to the larger whole, both
Absolutely.
of ourselves and our community, the world, the universe, etc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that, Kara. I love that. I really think that yoga is an opportunity to come as you are.
Yeah.
And that's always what it has spoken to me, come as you are. Don't
Yeah.
worry about everything else. You don't even really need a mat. Just come as you are. Come as you are.
Yeah.
Just acceptance,
Yeah.
and also curiosity and inspiration in the very ordinary. And then
Yeah.
you realize how beautifully extraordinary it is. Yoga is a beautiful lens,
Yeah.
and it's so much more than that too.
That's right. So I know that one focus area for you over the past while has been trauma, and how to bring a yoga practice into relationship, might we say,
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it.
with
Mhm.
trauma, the idea of trauma, how it lives in us. So if you could just say a little bit about that, and yeah, just talk away. I'm just interested to hear what
Sure,
you have to say.
sure. Um, I would say that around the end of the 90s and into the 2000s, I was taking yoga into women's shelters, and it was gentle asana practice, breath practice, and a lot of support talk. And some of that was recovery related. All of it was moving past circumstances of constriction to circumstances of expansion in a big general kind of way. Nobody was really calling that trauma at that time, but I certainly felt it was akin to anything as a very young therapist that I had ever seen as the result of some kind of a physical accident, a car accident, or some kind of a trauma in that way. It wasn't long after that that research and then printed material and so on started moving in that direction. I'm very grateful for where I did my graduate program, because they saw it. Peter Levine and Marsha Linehan and other therapists, psychological pioneers, I'll call them, although Peter Levine might be a somanaut, a body mind pioneer. We're starting these conversations at that point in time, and they resonated with me so strongly. And I started resonating with other people who thought that yoga is part of this journey as well. It took another 10 years for there to be really a book to come out about it, about blending the two. And that was David Emerson's Overcoming Trauma with Yoga. I found my work in that book and felt like, okay, here's a way to now bring this into teacher trainings. He wrote what I think is an even better book called Bringing the Body into Treatment not long after that, and so on. So I love how I felt like I felt like the conversation had seeds, and then those seeds grew into something that allowed there to be lots of experimentation individually. And I had some individuals who trusted me with being part of their process, with little maybe suggestions to shape it a little here, change it a little there within the course of therapy. And that my somatic experiencing training comes into play with that as well. Yoga is somatic experiencing. It brings it all together, but it's also a very personal experience. So making suggestions that allow someone to invite these ways of being in the body slowly in the way they need was something that I felt was truly remarkable and truly a noble, honorable way that yoga can be part of that process for them. I think Tai Chi is also a wonderful way, and you can actually combine the two. I mean, if you move in a yogic way, where it's more like a flow rather than standing and holding postures, either way is wonderful. There's so many ways that, I mean, I think yoga would say, yeah, use this the way it best suits you in the place you are now.
Yeah.
And so that process led me through lots of healing in my own life, but also in suggesting ways for other people to approach their own healing. And I think that this is still an ongoing story. It's still an ongoing healing story for all of us.
Yeah.
And I want to continue to be part of that process. How can we, as teachers, extend these invitations without someone feeling like we're not giving enough structure, and yet not giving too much structure, because the structure is within the person? How do we wake up that memory? Or do we just simply allow them to continue as that memory unfolds within itself? Everybody's different. Every group is different. And it's always a bit of an experiment, but for the person as well. So I decided to go to do teacher trainings that were specific to trauma sensitive work. And so I finished that with the Trauma Center Trauma Sensitive Yoga, which is led by David Emerson, Jen Turner, and many others, Dr. Sydney Sheldon. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful practice, but it's so wide open that it's still writing itself. And that's a really beautiful thing to be a part of.
It's nice to, I will say that I find myself drawn to organizations and styles of practice and teachers who remain very open to that evolution.
Yeah.
Who don't get sort of very tied down to, okay, this is this definition of this practice, and this is how we're going to do it forever. And I am very interested in that kind of, yeah, let's see what happens. And, you know, I used to say it this way, but I've learned, and now I'm talking about it more this way. So that's really interesting to me.
Yeah. And I love the research aspect of it too. Being able to ask students to not just talk about and reflect, but to about how they're thinking about their own trauma, working with trauma, but how it's changed their bodies over time, how trauma has changed their bodies,
Mhm.
how their thinking has changed their bodies.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ways of looking at trauma. That word is full of meaning and different meaning now.
Mhm.
And being witness to that has been one of my terrifying joys, I think, because it needs to retain its meaning.
Sure.
And thinking about how it affects the nervous system is incredibly interesting to me now, and where I mainly work when it comes to yoga, because I think that it's accessible for anyone, because we can feel the nervous system directly. It's the difference between being informed and being sensitive.
Mhm. So I know, you know, at least I won't speak for everyone in the world, but that there are a couple of different ways that people refer to this kind of practice. One is the phrase that you used, trauma sensitive, and then another is trauma informed. Do you perceive a difference between those two? And if so, can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, there I do see a difference between the two with my background in psychology, mental health counseling, substance abuse treatment, and yoga, and many other body modalities that I've worked with over the last 30 years. Um, Informed and sensitive, trauma informed, trauma and sensitive have been used as synonyms for quite a while.
Mhm.
And I think in general, it's fine. There's plenty of crossover between the two ways of looking at a trauma approach. And informed, sensitive in general, oh, whatever.
Sure.
but
Yeah.
but it's the difference between a top down and a bottom up practice. Trauma informed comes from therapy work. It comes from psychotherapy work. It's a cognitive approach. Trauma informed, if we think about the word informed, informed is telling us that this approach is going to focus primarily on cognition and therefore behavior. And that's one way of looking at how to deal with trauma. Thought substitution, that kind of thing, is important. And so in my way of looking at things, a trauma-informed language comes from allopathic approaches of trauma from the brain, and not necessarily organic brain structure, but from how we think about the trauma. It's a top-down approach.
Okay.
So I feel trauma, I'm going to think about ways that I can calm myself down by thinking through the trigger. I don't really like that word, but it's a good one. Triggers and other things that I'm experiencing because of my trauma. So it's that approach is often used when people are trying to feel comfortable driving after a car accident, feel comfortable going into situations where they have experienced a very unexpected and quite negative event. And it's a beautiful way to approach it. And there's a lot about it, mindfulness and other ways of looking at treating trauma that come from that. I'm just saying it's a top-down approach.
Okay.
Trauma sensitive acknowledges that we need some top-down informing. However, that what's happening from here down, 7/8 of the body, there's an opportunity to include that as well. So a trauma sensitive approach is looking at the body and how trauma is stored in the body. So there's quite a bit about trauma and reactions to stimuli in our environment that we feel rather than control. And that's where a trauma sensitive approach, I think, has a lot to say about things like polyvagal theory and how to incorporate that into what we're doing, how breath actually works to help us through integrating trauma into the next part of our lives after it happens. And trauma informed uses things like that as well. But they may or may not necessarily be valuing what the body is contributing to that guidance of how to bring ourselves to wholeness after a traumatic event. And for each of us, trauma is a different scale. For some people, fireworks, as it's July 5th today, fireworks are fairly traumatic for some people, but for others, they're not. And so that person who experiences trauma from loud sounds may have learned ways to take care of their body during times where everyone else is outside letting off fireworks. So they may have learned that they're very hearing sensitive. They might maybe just put on headphones and do something else. Other people might go to a whole new location, so they're not even around the vibrations because they might be sensitive to the concussion caused by even bottle rockets and those kind of things. So a trauma sensitive approach, I think, is bringing an awareness of how the body shows us a direct path to healing. It speaks a different language. That's the language of sensation, which is one thing that people who've experienced trauma can have a hard time being with. And so that's a slow process that requires some thinking, but it needs a lot more than that. And it's a conversation that's ongoing. But the two terms, trauma informed and trauma sensitive, really are talking about two different origins of the healing, in my opinion. Is it coming from thought and thinking primarily? Is it coming from the body primarily? Or is it coming from somewhere in between? And so it's interesting to me that the terms have become synonymous. I think they've become synonymous because a lot of times people like to equate what yoga is doing to some kind of allopathic method to give it a little more support, maybe even a little more credibility. But there's plenty of practices all over the world that are leading from the body. And that's what I think trauma sensitive yoga practices do. They lead from the body.
Yeah. Well, that's where I like to lead from.
Absolutely. The mind is just part of the body.
Well, yeah, ultimately, and at a certain point, this even the idea of a separation between the two sort of falls away, right? Because it is all one mechanism ultimately,
It is.
and there can be no thought, belief without there first being sensation.
That's right.
At the core of all of those sort of, one might say, higher levels or whatever emotion, thought, belief, at the core of that, there is always maybe it was somewhere many years before, maybe even, in the womb or prior, there was a seed of sensation.
And that's why we study embryology.
Yeah. Look at that, full circle.
Okay. And in body mind centering, we talk about how the senses come online, or it is talked about how the senses come online. And one of the first senses that we need so that we can find nourishment. We need to be able to feel on our little baby cheeks warmth and skin. And then around the mouth, we need to be able to find a way to deliver the sustenance to our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
When we're no longer absorbing it, we have to be able to find it through our senses.
Yeah.
The body leads the way.
Yeah.
And that's what trauma sensitive can help someone do. And I think it's fascinating that all of that is going on while someone's just trying to keep their breath a little more natural instead of going into hyperventilation when they do public speaking.
Right.
I think it's just so beautiful to watch all of these things underneath. And so my yoga studies have been really varied around that sense of wanting to be a part of that mystical wisdom and having a sense that it's knowable.
Yeah.
Body wisdom feels very different than mind wisdom. And so I like to do a lot of practices where you access both and try to constitute them back into each other, like a, frozen can of orange juice or something, right? Constitute it back together.
That's
because
right.
I like to feel reconstituted.
Oh, yeah, me too.
And I think trauma brings us out of old reconstitutions and brings us into new ones.
Yeah.
Sometimes whether we like it or not.
Yeah. And they're adaptive, right? It's not,
It is adaptive.
it's not, I think it can be natural to feel like it's bad or wrong, because often it's painful.
Absolutely.
These adaptations, but I always love that reminder of, this is our body, mind's wisdom trying to keep us safe. These adaptive thoughts, beliefs, contractions, whatever they are. It's very natural.
It is. And I think practicing yoga can be a celebration of those. It can be an inviting of our natural, innate wisdom and skills to come to us when we need them most. It can even be an invitation to the ancestors to be with us because we carry their DNA in our cells. And there are yoga practices that are all about cellular consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
It can all be there.
Yeah.
It just depends on where we are, what we need, and where we want to practice.
Yeah.
Yoga offers all of that on a very individual level. So it's amazing that asana can, for us Westerners is usually the gateway. And look what it opens up. It's just it's always an incredible thing to me to think about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes me feel like a little piece of stardust in a great big yoga universe. And I'm so happy to be a part of it.
Yeah. All right, Becky. Well, I'm going to wrap us up with this last question, our
Okay.
classic question. What would you say is the essence of yoga?
Well, the first word that came to me with that question is consciousness.
Mm,
But in our talk about top down, bottom up practices, the kind of consciousness I'm talking about includes thinking
mm,
and actions and feelings, but it also includes this innate body wisdom. And I think the essence of yoga is learning to be one with that
mhm.
in a world that a lot of times asks us to be very diversified and very dimensional, which is lovely. Yoga teaches us how to bring all of that through and between and flow between different things that we need in different moments of our lives and being cognizant of that.
Mhm.
So, yeah, we're in the flow of life, but we're also the life itself.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful, beautiful gift that yoga has given me. So I think the essence of yoga is inspiration and curiosity. Where are we going to go next?
Yeah.
What kind of studies interest me next? And staying a lifelong learner and maybe bringing the lens of the body a little more into those learning moments. What
Yeah.
does it feel like to take this information in through my sacral chakra?
Yeah.
What does it feel like to bring it in through the back of that chakra?
Mhm.
What does it mean to bring it into my heart?
Yeah.
I'm hearing it with my mind, but am I feeling it with my body?
Yeah.
So to me, the essence of yoga is just to keep learning, keep going, not necessarily to improve,
Mhm.
but maybe to just simply for the power and pleasure, maybe more the pleasure
Yeah.
of of being one with what's possible. Hmm,
Yeah. I like that. Being one with what's possible.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Becky, for chatting with me today. I really appreciate it. And Becky is teaching in our upcoming 200 and 300-hour yoga teacher training immersion programs at the Essence of Yoga Center. So if you'd like more information about that, just take a look at our website, shoot us an email. All right, thanks so much.